Hello viewers, welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be explaining about what is Kubernetes Service. So Kubernetes Service is a service controller running inside the Kubernetes cluster, which will help you to do a load balancing for the pods or deployment that is running in the Kubernetes cluster. And also, it will help you to access your application outside your Kubernetes cluster. Okay, what is load balancing? So load balancing is nothing but when you, so for example, let us assume that I am having a website called 7hills.com. The 7hills.com is running by 3 hosts in my personal machine, host A, host B and host C. All these 3 are my personal computers, and I need to register these 3 hosts in the public DNS registry. It can be like a F5 or it can be like GoDaddy's. It can be any registry where I need to go and register my host name and IP. So when the user accessing the 7hills.com, it will go to your registry, the DNS registry, and it will help you to resolve your host with the IP address. Once it is get resolved, then the load will be routed to my personal computer, to any of the hosts A, B or C based on the load. That is why it is called load balancing. Let us see how this load balancing is going to perform in Kubernetes cluster for the services. That's why I call it as why we need a service. And there is a concept called cluster IP, which is your default port, which will help you to access your application within your Kubernetes cluster. If I wanted to access my application outside the Kubernetes cluster, then I need the NodePort. The NodePort is a configuration. That's something you need to configure in your YAML file. And then when you do that, execute that YAML, you can access your application outside your Kubernetes cluster. Let us see all these 3 items in action. As we all know that pods are short-lived and ephemeral, which means that whenever you delete and recreate a new pod, a new IP will be generated. So because of it, continuously keep changing your IP for every new build and deployment. So you need to keep register your new IP in the DNS registry, which is a tedious thing. Just to avoid, your Kubernetes service, which will provide you the static IP, which can be a consistent and that can be registered in the DNS. That is the reason why we are going for Kubernetes service. Let me quickly go into the demo. For easy to understand, I have like 3 open windows in my computer. On the left hand side, you see the Unix box. That is where I am going to run my Kubernetes commands and then going to run my YAML file. On the right hand side, you see the browser, Mozilla Firefox browser. That is my browser inside my Kubernetes cluster. On the left hand side, you see the Chrome browser. That is the browser running in my local desktop, which is outside the Kubernetes cluster. Let us go and run the Kubernetes command to create the deployment and services. So let me go here. I have like 2 YAML file already in my Unix box. So let me open what is there in the deployment YAML. This is the same YAML file what I have used in my previous video. Please go through that video to understand the detail of this YAML file. So I'm going to go and run this now. kubectl create -f deployment.yaml. Okay, kubectl get pods. So I have one pod which is running now. I need to find out under which IP this application is running. For that, kubectl describe pods, and then you copy this and put over here and execute. You can see your IP address here. Ten dot 10.46.204, and this is running in the port 80, which you can see over here, 80 TCP. Okay, you see that there is output get okay. I'm going to try the same here in my personal computer with 80. Again, I'm going to just let you know, this is inside my Kubernetes cluster and this browser is outside my Kubernetes cluster. You see this pod is accessible inside my Kubernetes cluster but not outside the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so to resolve this problem, I'm going to create a service. Okay, before I go and create a service, let us assume this URL I have given to external users. So I told that the Kubernetes are ephemeral, which means that whenever I delete and recreate a new pod, the new IPs will be generated. Let me go and do that. Clear kubectl delete -f. Get pods. Yeah, it will have the new IP than what it was before. This time it is 46.206. So here, so you cannot, if you go on in this page, it will keep spinning. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to replace with 206:80. Yeah, for this reason, why we cannot use this pod for the application. So basically every time when I need to register in the DNS, I need to go and update like initially 204, and then I need to put a request to modify 204 to 206. It's like in a reality these things will not work. For that reason, why we need to have a service. For now, again, I know when I go and try outside my cluster, it's not going to work anyway, because the port is not exposed outside the Kubernetes cluster. Let me go and create a service. Okay, before that, let me show you what is there in the service. Cat. So yeah, two things you need to remember actually. The label and selector, this should match with your labels in your deployment YAML. So that is something what you need to remember when you write your YAML file. So here I'm saying that the pod is going to run in the port 80, and but I'm not, and pod is running on the 8080, and I'm listening with the port number 80. So I'm not exposing outside the cluster. Okay, still I'm not doing that. If you by default, when I execute this service.yaml, this port is going to be a cluster IP, which I will show you shortly. kubectl create -f. Okay. So this is the one I was referring. The type is cluster IP. Whenever if you wanted to access only within the Kubernetes cluster, your type should be cluster IP. So there is nothing specifically you need to declare. That is a default one, and it's running on the port 8080. Okay, now I'm going to access this one with that with this IP. Okay, 10.110.72.98.8080. Okay, it's working. So even if I go and delete and recreate my pod, my this URL will going to remain as is. Okay, let me go and kubectl get pods. I'm going to delete this pod, so that means I'm going to create a new IP. Okay, so which is not going to impact any of my IP, because when you do a service, your IP is always going to be a static one. So kubectl delete -f deployment YAML. So you can see this URL will not working now because I stopped the Kubernetes pod. I'm going to recreate. Sorry. Okay, so let's see that pod if it is running. Yes, it's running. Let's go in the URL. Yeah, it's working. So the point here is, whenever the pod deployment pod is deleted and recreated, your URL is still going to remain the same. That is the advantage of having a service above the pods and deployment. That's why I said that your service can act as a load balancer. But still this is not going to work. I can just give the same here 8080. It's not going to work. So I need to modify this. I need to change this type from cluster IP to NodePort. Let us show you how to do that. So there is no changes needed for your deployment.yaml, but you need to change something in your service.yaml. So let me change this. Here I need to add and then I need to add one more line here. So there is a range that you need to give the NodePort from 30,001 to 32,000 something. So where you can Google and find out there is a range. Let me go and check what is that range. This is your NodePort range. So any number if you give, that should work. If you look at here, the port is 8080. That is your container which is running, and this is your host port, and you are exposing your container port to the NodePort. So which means that once you modify this and run, you can access your application outside your cluster. So far without the NodePort, we cannot access our application. So once we modify and run your service, we can go and access your application outside your cluster. So let me do that. Let me save it. Okay, so now you see here your type is modified to the node port, and then it says that the port is 330,001 is exposed. I'm going to try that now. So let me do this cube worker. So you see here, and this is one of my host name in the Kubernetes cluster, and then this is another one worker node. So it's still working, and this is my control plane, cube control. So if you see here, all my host with this port is working outside my cluster. So the advantage of having a node port is that you can access your application outside your Kubernetes cluster. I hope you understand the difference between the cluster IP and node port, and the concept of load balancing, how the load balancing works with the help of services in Kubernetes. Please post your comment if anyone not clear on this concept. I'm happy to explain you over by replying back to your comment. If you like my video, please like it and subscribe it. Thank you.